Welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
Hi, this is Christine here in the host chair today, coming back from our Earth Feels 2022 hiatus for a special pre-COP27 discussion that I'm calling Think Quantumly, Act Locally. Spiritual leader, poet, and peace activist Thich Nhat Hanh famously said that only love will save us from climate change. So as we approach the 27th, so almost 3 decades of the UN COP meetings, COP standing for Conference of the Parties, as we approach the date for this 27th UN Climate Conference, which begins November 6th and runs until the 18th, and this year the meeting is being held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Last week, a new UNFCCC report was released that showed that globally governments' climate plans are too weak to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was a politically agreed upon goal at the Paris climate talks back in 2015. And in fact, even that scientifically, scientists can't guarantee that that's a stable climate goal. But anyways, right now we are globally on track to warm our planet by 2.5 degrees Celsius, which would be catastrophic for people and nature. So it can feel overwhelming and hopeless. And here we are. Today we're going to talk about this dire warning that we're getting from scientists who are now increasingly willing to engage in civil disobedience, like getting arrested, to bring this topic to the top of the public's mind. But yet, in spite of the science, as I said, we are still on this suicidal course. Suicidal for humans and the beings, plants and animals that share the planet with us. The planet herself will survive. She's survived mass extinction events before, and we're now in the midst of the 6th mass extinction, this time the first one that's been caused by humans and our activities and our pollution. So the Earth will survive, but what does it mean for humans? And what does it mean if we want a livable planet for our children and grandchildren? Indigenous author Jack Forbes, in his book Columbus and Other Cannibals, identified the Western compulsion to consume the earth as a sickness. Of course, we all know we've had a coronavirus pandemic going on since 2020, but Jack Forbes would say we've had another much more malevolent and deadly infection that's been going on in Western culture for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Derek Jensen asks, why is the dominant culture so excruciatingly, relentlessly, insanely, genocidally, ecocidally, suicidally destructive? So, on that cheerful note, hang in there with me, because we are going to talk about what the findings of quantum physics or quantum mechanics, they're used interchangeably, tell us about our place in the universe, in our own lives, and in the midst of this climate crisis. So I'm going to share a little bit from my perspective, as I've mentioned before, but I'll just talk a little bit about it again. I am a climate activist. My background is that I was a nurse for 25 years, but for much of the last decade, as well as being a climate activist, I have been focused on using energy healing. And I'm not talking about clean energy, although it is clean, but I'm talking about energy healing as opposed to sort of the conventional medical model for healing. So I do intuitive energy work to help people clear blocks in their lives. And I also do what I would describe as spiritual detective work. And not to talk much more about that, but just to say, because of that work, I am privileged to have glimpses into other dimensions other than physical reality, which is where this crisis, this climate crisis, this climate emergency is happening. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what a quantum view of things might suggest for us at this time. As an intuitive energy healer and spiritual detective, I pay attention to the invisible energy that permeates our world. Now, in older civilizations like China and India, they called that chi or prana. It isn't recognized in our mainstream Western culture or medical system. However, thanks to Einstein and the many other scientists since his time who have studied quantum physics, we in the West now have a science-based reason to view ourselves as more than just a solid clump of cells. Western science has now caught up with older civilizations in declaring, at least at the quantum level, that there is a subtle energy that permeates our bodies and extends beyond the limits of our physical bodies. So what does that mean in light of the climate emergency? Well, so there's a term that's come out of the science of quantum physics or quantum mechanics, and it's called quantum consciousness. So before we go too far down that path, though, let's talk a little bit about quantum mechanics or physics. I'm just going to use those terms interchangeably, but I'm not going to go too deep a dive into it, although I will have links in the episode discussion if you want to do a deeper dive in it. But let's just remind ourselves that over 100 years ago, Albert Einstein was one of the first scientists to discover that everything, including our bodies, was made of energy. His famous equation of special relativity, E equals mc squared, or energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, expresses the fact that mass and energy are interchangeable. They are different forms of the same thing. I think one author I was reading recently said when quantum physicists studied the quantum world, they had the rug pulled out from under them and found that, in fact, there was no floor there because the world of material reality that we're surrounded with, that we believe is the only world, the true reality, is actually not solid matter. Quantum physics tells us that the solid matter that we and the world around us are made of is not actually solid at all. Instead, at the most basic level, we and everything around us is constantly vibrating energy. Everything that exists in its essence is energy. You can also substitute energy for light. Everything that exists is in its essence light. So that really turns our Western concrete mechanical view of the world on its head. Quote from Dr. Ami Goswami, who's a physicist, and he has said, "People often ask me, if everything is not made of matter, then what is everything made of? And I say to them, consciousness. Everything is made of consciousness." And I would just like to point out that the findings of quantum physics don't actually change how we navigate material or physical reality. We know that it's still a good idea to avoid bumping our heads on door frames and to exercise and eat well to keep our physical bodies healthy. The laws of gravity still apply. I can't step off my deck without using the stairs without hurting myself. But in his book about quantum physics, The Dancing Wu Li Masters, an overview of the new physics, Gary Zukav writes, "Our experience tells us that the physical world is solid, real, and independent of us. Quantum mechanics says simply that this is not so." Let's take a moment just to pause and consider or remember the idea that you and all the objects that surround you are vibrating energy. Big breath in and big breath out. Just consider, I'm energy. This mic that I'm speaking in is energy. The chair you're sitting in or the floor you're walking on is energy, even though it appears solid. So, just briefly, another astounding finding of quantum physics is the interaction between the observed and the observer. Basically, it tells us we're in relationship to our surroundings all the time. So the observer effect suggests that even passive observation changes what happens. So scientific experiments, I'm just going to repeat again, suggest that the very act of observing an interaction changes it. That suggests that we play an active role in the world and that our consciousness has an impact on material reality. So the world isn't just a personal hallucination, please don't go there with this, but it does suggest that we are connected by a unifying consciousness that underlies the whole world. The quantum world, which is what underlies the world of material reality. About 100 years ago, Nobel Prize-winning physicist Max Planck stated, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness." Unquote. So, what does this have to do with the climate emergency and thinking quantumly and acting locally? Physician and author Larry Dossey puts it this way: human consciousness is fundamentally local, not localized or confined to specific points in space, such as brains or bodies, nor to specific points in time, such as the present. A mind that is non-local, which, just in an aside, I would remind our listeners, that's all of us, all of our minds. So a mind that is non-local is unbounded in space and time and cannot be separate from other minds, but must be united with all other minds. So that's the end of the quote from Dr. Larry Dossey. In this climate crisis, we cannot give up hope. In the quantum world, miracles happen all the time. There's a huge difference in the quantum world between something having no possibility of happening and something having a very, very small possibility of happening. That very small possibility in the quantum world is all it takes for the possibility of it to materialize. So we know there is a very small possibility that we are going to change the suicidal course that we're on as a global culture led by Western values of money over everything, apparently, even the natural world. Even though we all know you can't eat money in the end, you can't drink money. But that's the trajectory we are on. But it behooves each one of us to remember, in the quantum world, a small possibility doesn't mean a non-existent possibility. And I just want to share that I'm sharing my thoughts about the quantum world and our place in it, as well as my insights into the spiritual world, not as an expert, but as someone who is a pilgrim on the road to understanding the mysteries of life and how to live in a climate emergency. None of us have done this before, so I don't claim to have a corner on the truth. I am on the path, stumbling next to all of you. To go back to the topic of this podcast, think quantumly, act locally. I don't know if you appreciate the little pun that I worked into that title, because of course part of what Einstein revealed in his quantum theory was the universe is kind of strange non-locality, which suggests that the universe as an orderly expanse where specific events happen in specific locations may be an illusion, but we're not going to get to go down that rabbit hole today. I just thought I wanted to highlight it a little bit. But what does acting locally mean when you know that we live in a quantum world? You know that in our essence we are light. We are born to shine our light in the world, to heal ourselves and to heal others. Whether or not you're an intuitive energy healer, that is what we are each here to do, what we are born to do. And you can shine your light in whatever occupation or not that you have. So, first thing is to take a breath every now and then, pause if you can during the day, and remind yourself that you and the objects that you see around. I'm looking out a window at our fence, at the neighbor's house next to it, at my bookshelf with a bunch of my favorite items on it, and looking at my hand now. I am here, I am in the physical world, but there's a part of me that at the very, very core is vibrating energy. And if we remember that, stop and regularly remind ourselves of that during the day, then we can, for one thing, remind ourselves that all is not lost. And we haven't talked about the role of past, present, and future in the quantum world, but quantum science suggests that it doesn't exist in a very real way. Time doesn't exist. So if we want to change the trajectory that we're on, let's change what our focus is. And we want to focus on the fact that we are light, that we are connected, all connected to each other through this quantum consciousness realm, and that we want our consciousness to be a healing one, to be contributing to the healing of ourselves and our planet. And so I don't have time today to talk about the role of emotions in this quantum realm, but my work suggests that the greatest healing we can bring to ourselves and others is to be very aware of our emotions, but not to let them overwhelm us, and to make our mantra forgiving everyone, everything. And I know if you've had trauma in your life that you feel has been inflicted on you that is unforgivable, you know what, that's between you and hopefully your therapist or healer. So if it just doesn't seem possible for you, this isn't about guilt tripping, but for those of us who have the option to forgive our neighbor who we don't get along with, to forgive our brother-in-law who's so annoying, to send out that love and compassion rather than anger and unforgiveness, I would suggest that's a choice that we can make that contributes in the quantum realm to the possibility that we can deal with this climate emergency. And I started this podcast reading a quote from Columbus and Other Cannibals, where the author Jack Forbes talked about the infection, the disease that causes the Western culture to destroy the world, the earth, our mother. And I believe that thinking quantumly is a way to become immune to this disease. And in fact, remembering that at our core we are light, we are vibrating energy, and forgiving ourselves and others not only gives ourselves immunity from this disease, but sends out healing ripples right around us and into the collective field. So again, to reiterate, remind ourselves, if we can during the day, that as much as appearances are to the contrary, we are indeed vibrating energy, all of us, and we can influence, have a ripple effect out in the world by changing our focus and by working on our emotions. I love that this podcast is called Earth Feels, because as my energy work has evolved over the recent years, it turns out that trapped emotions, inherited emotions, ancestral emotions, past life trapped emotions contribute to a blanket of trauma on this planet, which I'm convinced contributes to the spiritual unhealthiness that has got us into this situation that we're in environmentally. I hope to do one more podcast during November while COP27 is going on, and it's going to be entitled Think Cosmically, Act Locally, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the idea that the trauma of being in this Earth school and over millennia is what may be contributing to our environmental crisis. And I'm going to have a guest on that podcast who brings her own unique spin on energy healing and emotions. So stay tuned for that. Please don't give up hope, even though times are grim. It just may be that you and I were made for just such times as this. And remember the good news, folks, that in Brazil, whose election, it was a runoff election between Lula and Bolsonaro, was really, really crucial for the future of the planet and the climate. Remember that Lula won, and he is clearing a path for saving the Amazon rainforest. So that's worth celebrating. And you know what your action items are. Take time to take a breath. Remember that your energy, and think about how you can mist out there, as a good friend of mine described, what one way of sending good vibes out there is misting love and peace and kindness and compassion over the people around you, over the representatives meeting in Egypt starting on November 6th. We can embrace the sentiment that we don't know how things are going to turn out, because life is a mystery. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, we are all in the end walking each other home in the spiritual sense. And there's some bumps ahead on this road. So let's remember the words of the Dalai Lama. Be kind whenever it's possible. And it's always possible. Take care, my friends.